Buddy, good evening. Welcome to the broadcast. Today is July 23rd, 2019. And tonight's broadcast is about a principle that for many of us is something that we have to practice and becomes a theme throughout our life. I think of this almost as a mantra because it's so naturally for most of us, it's so against our grain to understand what it means to practice or to be in healthy detachment with our loved ones. And I'll talk about this tonight, but part of that is because it wasn't modeled for us. And more important than the modeling, it wasn't the way that we were raised. We were raised to believe, to experience that a certain level, if you will, of emotional and psychological proximity was love and was healthy. And so, because of the modeling, because of the experience of being in a relationship or relationships in certain kinds of ways, it becomes very foreign to us. So, I think it's a fascinating principle, but also one that for many of us, if you're a veteran of this, if you're new to this, it's for all of us to understand that this becomes a life's work or a life's project. So, we begin with the idea of the overview of healthy detachment. Healthy detachment is really healthy attachment. It's the same thing, it's synonymous. We call it detachment because that is what it feels like to those of us who are shown that intimacy is synonymous with anxious attachment, dependency, and enmeshment. Intimacy, healthy attachment, and healthy detachment will feel to most like not caring, like abandonment, and like too much distance. So I think the use of the word detachment in the term or the phrase is preparing us emotionally to for what most of us are going to experience, which is we're going to experience it like too much. And what's more than that, and maybe most important for not just for parents, but also for friends, other people that we have relationships, our coupleships, our partnerships, is that that's what we're going to be accused of doing, right? When we take a step back and remove ourselves from the drama, from the dependency, and from the reactivity, from the over involved or anxious attachment. When we do that, we're likely to hear the accusations come at us that we don't care, or that we're abandoning, or that we're too far away. I love this quote. Melanie Beatty, of course, is kind of the grandmother of codependency, written Codependency No More and several other books after that. She says codependents are reactionaries. They overreact, they underreact, but rarely do they act. They react to the problems, pains, lives, and behaviors of others. They react to their own problems, pains, and behaviors. So, one of the difficult things about a lot of the principles surrounding healthy detachment and codependency and recovery from codependency is that it's subtle. It's not something that can be easily defined by behaviors, right? It's a way of being, a feeling of responding to other people. And so I love how Beatty talks about this idea that it's reactive, but it's not active or assertive or authentic. And I'll talk about that more as we go. I borrowed some quotes from some sources. Detachment doesn't mean I'm trying less hard. It just means that fears and emotions that used to torment and paralyze me no longer have the same power over me. I like this one. Detachment is not detaching from the person that we care about, but rather from the agony of involvement in the drama. Something that I wrote about. Healthy detachment is healthy connection. They're the same thing. From Al Anon, from the slogans that we hear in Al Anon and Codependence Anonymous, your serenity is your responsibility. And taking that back, taking that responsibility back, that your overall serenity and peace of mind is your responsibility, really disentangles you from others, from your child, and really feels at some level comforting to them that they're not responsible for your sense of self or well-being. Detachment, sometimes it's necessary in order to restore your sanity, your peace of mind. I love this quote. Sometimes you have to detach to find yourself. I think about our relationships sometimes as having a psychological gravitational pull. in the presence or relationship with the other person in our life, it's so easy to lose ourselves. It's so easy to be knocked off our feet, be taken off our center. So many parents and clients that I've worked with, after gaining some clarity, and I've talked about this in my own work, go back to the relationship, to the conversation with the person that they were describing the dilemma in therapy about. And they go back to that person, have that discussion, and very quickly they lose themselves. I've told the story, it's been a while now, of a student, a client that I had in the program, and how he had been eager and anxious to have a phone call with his parents. When several weeks in, I decided it was about time for him to have a phone call with his parents. And his father wrote a really difficult letter, really accountable and honest letter, acknowledging his own substance abuse disorder and the work that he was doing, and even some ways that he impacted his son. And so when he did that, and the son read the letter, I was ready that week, aside from what we were talking about in session in the letter, I was ready to give him a phone call. And before I could, because I was feeling uneasy about it, as this was a very powerful and potent moment in the family's process, my client said to me in the field, said, I don't think I want a phone call. As much as I've been working for it, I think I need some time by myself. I'm afraid, he said, if I get on with the phone with my parents, with my father, I'm going to lose myself. And I was so incredibly impressed by the insight, by the strength, by the wisdom that he was showing. That he could anticipate that if he got on a conversation too quickly with his father, not having digested and grounded himself in his own reaction to the letter, to what his father had shared, that he was likely going to lose himself. It was my letting go that gave me a better hold. Again, there's ironies, right? There's dialectical ideas, seemingly opposite ideas, but that are really um, compatible, that are involved in a lot of the areas of recovery. So let's talk about what detachment is and what it's not. What it is, first of all, there's a great book that's written for interventionists or intervention by Jeff and Deborah J. And it's called Love First. And they talk about that rare dynamic or attribute or skill of people that can stay connected to somebody and feeling extreme compassion and love and affection for that person, and at the same time maintain and set a healthy boundary. But they go on to teach that if we're to be most effective in our interventions, and you can think of interventions in the big way, thinking about a traditional intervention for somebody with a substance abuse disorder or a mental health issue, or you can think about interventions in terms of daily interactions around consequences. So the real talent isn't the right word, but the real growth, the real strength is having both at the same time, the ability to feel love, compassion, affection for somebody, and the ability to assert a boundary. Because the fear is, we know this. The fear is, if and when we set a boundary with somebody that we care about, that we're going to lose them, that they're going to pull away, that they're going to punish us, that they're going to withdraw. And so that's why it becomes so courageous. That's why it's such a courageous task. Detachment is love without control. And I think about this. I have the great fortune to be a therapist and to watch and think about human behavior and to interact with wonderful clients who teach me something all the time, every day. And so because of that, my filter is on a lot of the time. And so many of the interactions that I witness in the world, in my family, in myself, in others, is controlling. There's so much in our interactions that is based on a desire to control what somebody else thinks, what they feel, and what they do. So detachment is to let go of that control, but remain in the love. It's love with courage. And courage is important because, like I said, it takes courage to set and establish a boundary. It takes courage to tell the truth. Because when we tell the truth, we're surrendering control. We're not in control of how that other person responds. Detachment is differentiation, and differentiation is the balance between connection and autonomy. Differentiation is defined by the ability to be close to, connected, affectionate with, loving towards somebody, but at the same time, not at the cost of the individual self and of what you need ultimately. Detachment sees what others need and is able to distinguish that between what you yourself or we ourselves need. It's able to distinguish and delineate there. It's assertive and authentic and courageous. I put those on the list of what it is because so many people, when they hear and begin to learn about detachment or codependency recovery, they hear it as a laissez-faire, letting go, giving up, throwing in the towel kind of interaction. And it is absolutely not that. People that are in recovery for codependency are very active and courageous and honest and bold in their lives. And I put on there, lastly, honest, because it's a simple thing. Can we be honest with other people? And can we risk then the experience that they might feel or respond in ways that we find unpleasant or threatening? What isn't it? What is not detachment? The second list. It's not separation, right? It's separation from some things, but not from the person. It's not abandonment, although it's going to feel like those things. It's not caring. It's not being disconnected. It's actually learning to connect. It's not blaming, controlling other people. It's not failing, right? It's not when you practice detachment, you haven't failed at something. You've stepped into a higher level of being in relationship to another person. I'll tell you that most therapists, if they've done their work, are aware that what draws most of us, not 100% all of us, and not for every individual is it 100% of the motivation, but for a lot of us, the vast majority, codependency is the draw to becoming a therapist. And if we're open to the training and we do our own work in the process, we learn that therapy is the antithesis of codependency. And then we make that our life's work to be in relationship with other people. I say about myself, I don't need addicts or alcoholics in my life to be activated as a codependent. Plain and simple. I joke that I feel guilty for getting mail when it's raining outside because the mail carrier has to deliver my mail. It's in me. It's how I was raised. It's how I see relationships. It's how I understand love, right? It's all of those things. And so when a child comes into my life, we're going to do that dance. And if a child struggles with substance abuse disorder or mental health, it's going to somehow be intertwined with that. But it's important for me to say this, it is absolutely independent and it predates any of the relationships with my children. It's not passive, of course. It's not doing less. It's doing more, but different kinds of things. And detachment is not a solution for your child's problems. I think that can be the trick, right? That we can say, well, it didn't work. I tried healthy detachment. I tried assertive communication, whatever the skill, the tool, the idea, the concept is. And because we're still thinking of it as a cause and effect, as a cure, as a way to kind of control, or we'll probably use softer language like to affect somebody else. And when we're thinking or asking questions about it in those terms, we're in the problem. We're in the enmeshment. So why detachment? Because it encourages, and pay attention to the words that I use. It encourages autonomy on everybody's part and competency, right? It requires people innately to be responsible for themselves, to problem solve themselves, to deal with natural consequences themselves. Detachment requires a strong sense of self. We are unable to practice detachment if our sense of self is really fractured or compromised, because the change back messages, right? The arrows that come back our way are become a problem. It's synonymous with intimacy. And again, I just point that out to give you a little twist on the way of thinking about it. If you have an intimate relationship with somebody, you're practicing or living in healthy detachment. It models self-care. It makes me responsible for my serenity, my feelings, my meaning in life, my happiness, my joy. It doesn't preclude that I'm going to experience pain or sorrow or sadness, especially when people that I care about are hurting. But it doesn't become grounded or rooted in somebody else's behavior. So I learned to take care of myself. And in some really important and profound ways, the other person feels a little bit safer. Um, we stop participating in relationship to others in a way that tends to reinforce negative behaviors. We stop contributing to it. Classic phrases like rescuing and enabling. That's not all of it, but that's a part of it. Over functioning, that's something that I'm guilty of with my children and my family. Um, you know, we stop taking away from the problem behavior. We stop becoming the problem ourselves. I ask a lot of my parents and clients to make a shift in their relationships, to begin to talk about and identify on a regular basis with others in their family with whom they're codependent, to say things like, I have a disease. I have an issue that's worthy of working on. That's my work to do. I think that's incredibly important to shift that energy. And it requires great strength and courage and letting go and detachment. And it also means that I'm not contributing to the problem and inherently reinforcing the other behaviors that I don't want to see happen. I think it's really important to understand that this is a dance. And if we stop dancing, the other person has to kind of figure themselves out independent of us. But if we're dancing with it, we're kind of reinforcing. We become obsessed with, how can I fix it? How can I control it? How can I make them feel or think what I want them to make to what I want them to feel and think? And that obsessive thinking about controlling or fixing another person is the essence of a lack of detachment in us. Why is it so hard to define? Because it gets confused. It gets confused with passivity or inactivity. We confuse it with indifference or lack of love. We fear separation and loss, right? We're wired to be in relationship, and so are our children, and so detachment threatens that. Like I said, how they might react, or that we just might lose contact with them. We feel guilt and fear for being a bad whatever, bad spouse, bad parent, bad friend, bad whatever. And bad is kind of this umbrella term, right? That under which sets a lot of other descriptions: unfair, unloving, unkind, insensitive, selfish, whatever fits under that umbrella for us. We fear failing, right? And we measure our success, especially as parents, often by how well our children are doing. We fear being rejected. I've said that already. We fear rejection. And there's an irony to that, because as a parent, ideally, we don't focus on our children rejecting us, right? Abandoning us. And the way that I think about it, children can't abandon parent. They can cut off, they can pull away, but they can't abandon us. That's a parental behavior. And so if we're being held hostage by the fear of abandonment, what I know to be true is that we're trying to protect ourselves from something happening that already happened to us as children. In some way, our parents didn't provide us with that secure base so that we know that we're okay. And then because we don't have that secure base, it's very difficult to operate with our children. And we raise children with this anxious kind of presentation, this anxious attachment to get them to stick around. Of course, we fear pain. That might be the most basic human behavior is pain avoidance. And then we don't have models. We don't have models of what it looks like. I think about this all the time, especially in movies. When I'm watching movies, I think about it, and especially in movies where they're trying to model some psychological principles. And there are very few where differentiation and healthy detachment and healthy intimacy are modeled. In fact, one of the things we do with our younger children, our 17 and our 11-year-old, is we sit around oftentimes and talk about relationships in the series and the movies that we're watching. Because sometimes what's unhealthy gets modeled as healthy. And I think that can be harmful. I want to read to you a series of ideas of prose about this from livestrong.com. It's the ability to allow people, places, or things the freedom to be themselves. Holding back from the need to rescue, save, or fix another person from being sick, dysfunctional, or irrational. Giving another person the space to be herself. Disengaging from an over-enmeshed or dependent relationship with people. A willingness to accept that you cannot change or control another person, place, or thing. Developing and maintaining of a safe emotional distance from someone whom you have previously given a lot of power to affect your emotional outlook in life. Establishing of emotional boundaries between you and those people you have become overly enmeshed or dependent with in order that all of you might be able to develop your own sense of autonomy and independence. It's a process by which you are free to feel your own feelings when you see another person falter and fail and not be led by guilt to feel responsible for their failure or faltering. Very difficult in the parent-child relationship. A few more from livestrong.com. It's the ability to maintain an emotional bond of love, concern, and caring without the negative results of rescuing, enabling, fixing, or controlling. Placing all things in life into a healthy, rational perspective and recognizing that there's a need to back away from uncontrollable and unchangeable realities of life. It's an ability to exercise emotional self-protection and prevention so as not to experience greater emotional devastation from having hung on beyond a reasonable and rational point. It's the ability to let people you love and care for accept personal responsibility for their own actions and to practice tough love and not give in when they come to you to bail them out when their actions lead to a failure or trouble for them. It's the ability to allow people to be who they really are rather than who you want them to be. And finally, it's the ability to avoid being hurt, abused, taken advantage of by people who in the past have been overly dependent or enmeshed with you. One of my favorite stories and moments of learning was from a mother many, many years ago, whose daughter was in treatment several states away. And she was coming home for the holidays. She had come home on a previous holiday visit from her program. She was a young adult being treated for substance abuse disorder, and she had relapsed on a previous visit. And so she was planning for, I believe it was the Thanksgiving holidays, to come home for a visit. And she asked her mother in preparation, "Will you please test me while I'm home? Drug test me while I'm home?" And this mother said to her daughter, "No, I will not." And I was kind of taken back by that, thinking I kind of had a response to teach her that sometimes testing our children can be a helpful thing. Give them another reason, another excuse not to use. But this mother, more wise than I was thinking, said to her daughter, "I can't test you when you come home. If I do, it will trigger my disease. And I will likely think of myself responsible for your sobriety. So you can come home. And if it shows up, if you show up intoxicated or high, or if I see it, you're going to be asked to leave. but I'm not going to make it my project to try to keep you sober. I can't. And I thought that was the epitome of codependency recovery. A parent doing something that some might say wasn't by the book, some might have an opinion about, but doing something that was based on her recovery for her disorder and her disease, not to fix her child. And I thought that was profound. Demonstrating healthy detachment. When we let go of our expectations of others and do not try to make them fulfill our wants and needs, we are practicing healthy detachment. This is from Pamela Castelli. When we are able to remain in a place of joy or satisfaction while being in the presence of somebody who's in a negative place, we are practicing healthy detachment. When we refrain from offering advice, this is the thing that I see that's so ubiquitous and prolific in our society. When we refrain from offering advice and ways to fix things, but truly listen to somebody else, we are practicing healthy detachment. I shared with my son recently where he was actually sharing a success of his. And then I went into problem solving mode. I had ideas and advice for how he might build on this success to have greater success. And I called him a day or two later and I said, I'm sorry. My codependency is so bad that I'm solving problems that are successes. I'm solving problems that aren't there. And I said, part of it is I don't know how to be in a relationship as a father unless I'm in that role. And so I'm working on it and I'm going to make an amends to you. And he wasn't really upset by it. It wasn't very strong or triggering for him, but it was important for me to name that. And this with my 26-year-old. We're demonstrating healthy detachment when we allow someone to make his or her own decision and follow through with it. Even though we believe it will not have the beneficial outcome, we are practicing healthy detachment. So much of my coaching with parents over the years has evolved to the point that sometimes I say to parents, maybe you want to try this experiment. And I'm not saying that because I'm confident that it's going to turn out the way that you want. Maybe it won't. You get to decide if you're comfortable with supporting or funding the experiment. But part of that is maybe they'll get to a place where they see that it's not between you and them anymore. Maybe it's just about them and the world. And I don't even know that that will happen. And I think sometimes therapists are guilty of giving advice or directions to a parent. And the implied idea beneath it or behind it is if you do it this way, everything will turn out well. Right? This is not by chance that your child turned out this way. There are clear markers, indicators, cause and effect in your behavior that led to this. So if you shift that, if you reverse that, then you're going to cure it. And I think therapists can be guilty of that a lot. And it's very condescending, very judgmental, very simple-minded. That's why in our groups, we ask parents to listen and hold space for each other instead of to come up with you should solutions. I think that's critically important. In that vein, I've shared this recently. I was giving a talk about codependency at a conference. And one of the audience members, a therapist or consultant, raised their hand and said, Brad, how can you encourage a mother, for example, to kick her young adult son out of the home when the possible consequence could be death? And my response is, I would never encourage a mother to kick a kid out of the home. That's too big of a responsibility for me to take on. That has to be, in this case, the mother's or father's or whomever, spouse's choice, right? They have to make that choice on their own. What I would do is I would try to help heal the mother of her own wounds, her own proclivities toward codependency, and then from that more healed, whole, and centered place, she would make the decision that's right for her, which could be a variety of decisions. So again, the solution isn't in the techniques, right? It's not in the answers. The solutions come out of the answer, and the answer is finding self, finding out who you are. That's the solution. And out of that becomes your behaviors and your choices. We're demonstrating healthy detachment when we appropriately set a boundary with someone, by refusing to engage him or her in an argument. We are practicing healthy detachment. Another resource, 6 Steps to Detachment. Accept reality. There's very little you can do to change anyone besides yourself, and others people's problems aren't yours to solve. I love what Abraham Tversky says in his book, Addictive Thinking, where he talks about family members and parents being as resistant to their work as the client who is the addict, who has the disorder, is to theirs. They have the exact same excuses. So we have to surrender to this idea that we can't fix it. And that's so hard for a lot of us who are really good at controlling and manipulating people. And although we use that superpower for good in most of our lives, we also use it in an insidious way with the people that we have this kind of relationship with. Step number 2, give yourself credit. You've done a lot to help. You've tried everything. That's why when I model the discussion that a spouse might have with an alcoholic spouse, I say things like, I'm leaving because I can't have the alcohol in my house anymore. I can't have this behavior in my house anymore. You can keep drinking. This I am not doing to try to get you to stop drinking. In fact, I've spent the last 15 or 20 years trying to get you to stop drinking, and it hasn't worked. So this is the first time I'm really letting go, but I can't have it in my life. Step 3, restore balance. Seek balance and peace in your own life as best as you can. Make serenity your project, not the one who's struggling. Because on top of whatever else they're struggling with, carrying around the responsibility for your serenity is going to be crushing to them. Let go. Remember that others' behaviors are not a reflection on you, and their behaviors are not personal. You can't control what they do, but you can control how much you'll take on or how you respond. It's so hard as a parent, right? We get taught in our culture that our children are a reflection of us. We even get taught that by the therapeutic community, like I said earlier, that our children didn't arrive at this by chance. That in essence, we did cause it. React less. Notice when your feelings seem to be tied to the other person. Try to figure out why this happens, and then practice detachment the next time. Be kind to yourself as you work through this. I've been doing this personal work for 30 years. More than that, actually. Started when I was a teenager and I was sent to therapy. It started back then. So I've been doing this for 35, 36 years. And it's still a work in progress. And the best that I can do with it is keep it in front of me. And what I mean by that is don't imagine that I've left it behind. Don't imagine that I'm cured. Don't imagine that I've arrived. Practice self-care. Get in touch with your own needs and wants. Let others take care of you, accept their accomplishments, and find mutual relationships. Self-care is so hard for us codependents because our guilt gets in the way. It tells us that we're being self-absorbed or selfish or too sensitive or too this or too that. So we must do battle with guilt if we are to practice or make some progress in areas of self-care. In time, you will find that you feel calmer, less angry, less anxious, and better able to respond to your own life. And this is from Alison Salutoro. Alison Salutoro. So I talk about this idea from family systems theory about Mnuchin and Bowen, two of the creators of family therapy. Before the 1960s, people didn't meet more than one at a time in therapy unless they were in groups, but not in families, not if they were related to each other. And so a group of professionals all across the globe around the same time started developing the idea of family therapy based on family systems. And Mnuchin said that he described that that clarity, clear boundaries were the balance, the middle point between enmeshment and disengagement. Right? He said in disengagement, there are overly rigid boundaries. And in enmeshment, there are diffuse boundaries, no boundaries whatsoever. And then Bowen came along and said, I think of it as differently. He said, he described the same phenomenon. He said, there's fusion on one side of the equation, the continuum, and there's cutoff on the other side. But really, those are other sides, the other side of the same coin. They're the opposite of clear boundaries and intimacy. And he said, so while cutoff, disengagement, or enmeshment or fusion might look different stylistically, they're essentially the same thing. The inability to develop this idea of he called differentiation of healthy detachment. This idea where closeness and autonomy are balanced and neither one of them cannibalizes the other. So many of us codependents have a difficult time maintaining boundaries in the face of compassion, in the face of empathy. Empathy robs us of our ability to set boundaries because we understand we have compassion. And if we set a boundary, we're going to further hurt or injure the person who's struggling. We don't give ourselves permission to think about ourselves. So looking at Bowen and Mnuchin and their way of thinking about it, their idea helps us to see to a more subtle kind of an art form in all of this. What it looks like when we are not detached, some tools for self-examination, we're more likely to have angry or reactive outbursts, right? That's one of my reactions to people. We're passive or pleasing. We punish others with the silent treatment or game playing or manipulating. By the way, if you're codependent, you're going to experience healthy boundaries as game playing or manipulation because your filter is broken. So you learn to respond to other people and their boundaries as if it's authentic and assertive. You take them at face value. That's important. A codependent person will take often somebody's healthy boundaries as manipulative, or game playing. Repetitive dialogues, bullying, nagging, those are examples of behaviors that are common to a lack of detachment. Depression or anxiety over somebody's behaviors. That might be the most common symptom that I see with the parents that we work with at Evoke. Struggling with some significant depression or anxiety over other people's behaviors. I learned a long time ago by watching families in close proximity that when we understand what we can and can't control and we focus on what we can control, we feel less depression and anxiety. We blame other people for our feelings, right? Take on the victim stance. We don't take responsibility for our own feelings. We don't own them. In essence, we are codependent with another or obsessed with trying to control another. I see obsessive thinking as one of my big red flags with a lack of detachment. So what are the take homes? Become educated, learn about, read about healthy detachment. My book, The Dance of Anger by Harriet Lerner. Melanie Beatty's book called Codependency No More. Attend meetings. Begin to practice detachment like a mantra. Know that you're keep it in front of you. Know that that's going to be a lifelong journey for you. So keep it in front of you. Get support from mentors, from a sponsor, from a therapist. I'm a big proponent of people trying Al-Anon, Codependence Anonymous, or CODA, or Families Anonymous. I think also I'd add to that list ACOA, Adult Children of Alcoholics, because the beginning point, the starting point for our codependency was in the home with parents who had this model, whether they were alcoholics or not, who had this model, this way of being in relationships. Therapy. Therapy is my personal favorite and most effective way of working my recovery program. Turn it over to them. I have parents talk to me and call me with problems that are their young adult child's problems. And I say, this isn't your problem to solve. It's not. You don't need to. And while you might be good at it, and you might temporarily keep disaster at bay, and you can do it if you want. I don't try to talk them out of it. but it's probably not going to lead to the outcome that you want in the long run, which is your child developing a healthier sense of self, a whole, healed, recovering self. So turning it over to your higher power or to the other person. Practicing the beginner's mind. That just means beginning to challenge yourself with all the ideas about ways of being in relationship and what love means are an important part of it. Radical acceptance. This idea that what's happening, where you are in life, it's not a detour. It's not a sidetrack. It's exactly what you and I need to be going through to learn what we need to do. And if we can embrace what is instead of focusing on what should be, we get all the wisdom and all the gold, all the gifts that what is has to offer us. If we pay attention to what should be, what we're missing, we'll never get access to all that what is has to offer. Take care of yourself so others don't have to. Again, it's going to be, for most of you, it's going to be inherent in that self-care battle, that self-care striving, that you're going to do battle with guilt. Do battle with those messages that we heard, that we received earlier in life, that self-care is being a failure, being a bad wife, a bad husband, a bad father, mother, or friend. All right. I'm happy to address any questions now. Somebody writes, I know when I'm engaged in healthy detachment because my son will escalate and say, where's my old mom? I want my old mom back. Just be a mom and forget all the stuff they taught you in programs. They don't know what I need. The guilt that emerges from those words is really hard for me. It's a slow process for me. Thanks for this topic. It really resonates with me. Absolutely. It's for all of us. And thank you for that example. All right, I'm going to go to upcoming events, announcements, and then you can send in any questions that you have right now, and I'll address them at the end. We ask all of our clients to attend 6 12-step support groups. Some combination of Al-Anon, Code of Families Anonymous, or Adult Children. You can go to the web, Google them, and find meetings in your area. Alateen can be for teens, so if there are siblings who want, I wouldn't necessarily force a sibling into this, but who want to be a part of the process, taking them to an Alateen meeting can be helpful. RefugeRecovery.org or NAMI.org are other places you can go for support group psychoeducation that are free in your local area. All of these broadcasts are available on your favorite podcast app. On an iPhone, you can simply use the podcast app. On an Android device, you can use the SoundCloud app, or on the web, go to soundcloud.com and you can access all of these broadcasts. They usually go up on the podcast app around 11 a.m. Mountain Time the next day. You can follow us on Twitter and Instagram by using the handle @EvokeTherapy. You can also follow our intensive program on Instagram by using @EvokeSummitLodge. On Facebook, you can find us by searching Evoke Therapy Programs. You can also find the Alumni Foundation on Facebook by searching Evoke Family Foundation. And then our blog, of course, on evoketherapy.com has constant content each week. My book, The Journey of the Heroic Parent, is available on Amazon, also audio versions there. If you want to do a deep dive, if you're ready to kind of get into this, if you're ready to go to places that you've asked your child to go to, I would encourage you, implore you, unabashedly, to attend our Finding You. I believe in it. All of my family has been to one, a version of, not ours, but one similar to it. Our employees, our managers are all encouraged to go to one. We pay for and support upper level management and therapists to go to these. Email intensives@evoketherapy.com for more information. It's the best thing that you can do. Time-wise, financially, emotional, resource-wise, it's the best thing that you can do to contribute to your child's long-term growth. Upcoming parent support groups, I'll be in Southern California on August 11th. Coming up, 4 to 7 p.m. I'll be in New York City on September 9th, 7 to 9 p.m. I'll be in Chicago September 17th, 7 to 9 p.m. And then we'll announce a Bay Area meeting soon. For more details on locations to RSVP, contact Melanie at evoketherapy.com. Workshops, we ask all current parents to go to a workshop. So our upcoming our next workshop, if you can at all come. That's a multifamily 2-day experiential psychoeducational weekend. Our next one will be in our Oregon program, our Cascades program, August 17th and 18th. And you can talk to your Evoke therapist and see if a visit to the field to visit your child is it's a good time to do that at the same time. Our pursuits trips are adventure activities, nature activities all over the world for families or for young adults or adolescents. Think of Therapy Light or getting recalibrated, reconnecting to some of the work that you've done. Any other live questions that have come in, I'm happy to answer. One parent writes, I have 2 children who struggle with mental health challenges, addiction, and dangerous things. One is helpless and dependent. The other is competent and independent. I struggle to detach from the dependent one so much more. It is painful to watch somebody you love flailing and know you can't fix them. Thank you for sharing that. Not only do I identify with that and relate to that, and I think a lot of people were, but what I love about that is you just shared where you're still struggling, right? That's keeping it in front of you. That's part of the practice of recovery. So thank you for modeling that tonight. I really appreciate it. Any other questions or comments? One other parent writes, sometimes I find myself torn with expectations of my adult child's mental health diagnosis and not enabling a low functioning. That's why it's a work, right? That's why nobody else can perfectly define it for you. It's an exploration into yourself. Like my first book talks about, this idea of discovering and defining self is the first step to understanding our child, their problems, and our relationship to their problems. And that's why I go back to it over and over and over again. And I know it's not a popular thing to say, but diving into your own work is what you do to help the problem that you see out in front of you. So thank you. Another parent writes, I understand this topic in terms of adult relationships, but I'm having trouble in terms of parenting. If my underage son engages in risky behaviors, shouldn't we be controlling him with boundaries? It's a great question. It's hard and it's subtle, but boundaries are about taking care of yourself. They're not about trying to affect or change somebody else. Now, do they have an impact on other people? Absolutely. I talk about in the journey of the heroic parent, the idea that parent education doesn't change children, but it changes parents. And that change can have a profound impact on children. But healthy boundaries is to say to children, I'm not comfortable with that. Here's my boundary. Here's my limit. Here's the consequence because this is what I'm comfortable with. And you might think, well, that's just a runaround, Brad. That's just you still taking care of the child still taking care of you. My answer is no, it's not. You can be mad, you say to your son or daughter. You can hate it. I found that these principles to be true from the earliest of ages with my children. I've told this story about coming home from a business trip with my child who's now 11, who was at the time 4 or 5. And when I walked in the house, she ran into the laundry room and hid from me. Obviously dealing with some attachment issues with me, right? I work a lot. And so her protection was to withdraw. If she allowed herself to feel all the love and the wanting and the needing of her father's attention, then my trips would be excruciating for her. So she ran away. And the babysitter said, Livia, come back in here. Show your dad that you love him and that you're grateful that he's home. And I said, that's not how we do it in this family. I get it. She's allowed to be upset. So it's different. You're right. There are different decisions with underage children, but trying to control what they feel, what they think, walking on eggshells, trying to taking responsibility for fixing and curing them, all of those principles apply. The day-to-day decisions are different, and because it's your home and you're responsible for them, there's going to be boundaries. But those boundaries, as you do this work, those boundaries become based on what you need to feel okay, not ultimately the buttons that you need to push to fix them. Another parent writes, can you give examples of supporting secure attachment with a younger child while not becoming codependent? I have a very reactive, angry young child. I have very reactive, angry young children and struggle to provide comfort while not supporting the screaming and aggressive behavior, which causes me to feel angry and frustrated. Obviously, this is a bigger theme, right? This is a bigger work. I'm going to say this in response to this question, this parent's comment, because it's a great one and it's a profound one. When I work with parents, when I get a call from parents, either because they're inquiring about the program or our intensive program or even parent coaching, what I say to them is this is not a one-time deal, one-time answer. This is about learning to be in a different kind of relationship. And if you have a child with an attachment disorder, right, with a mental health disorder, with an addiction, you're going to need more resources and practice than other parents who are dealing with kind of the worried well children of the world. And so it's a long answer. It's a way of being. My answer is listen to the podcasts, go to therapy, go to Al-Anon. Read some of the books that we recommend highly. Read my book, The Journey of the Heroic Parent. Learn about being in a different kind of relationship with yourself first. Learn about your own childhood wounds. I'm going to be talking about the drama of the gifted child next week, or this week, excuse me, later on this week. In my opinion, the most important book in child development in the last 75 years. And it's not just me who thinks that, but understanding and learning our own wounding from childhood, our own unresolved childhood trauma is what gets in the way of us being in relationship to children. Children that are struggling, children that are kind of going through a typical life, children that are very young, and children that are older. Excuse me. So it's a practice. It's a discipline. It's a way of being. That's the best way I can answer it because it's such a big, powerful question. All right. It looks like that's all the questions that I have for this evening. Comments. Thank you for your participation. We had a great group this evening. I hope these points of contact are helpful to you, whether you're watching them live or in the archive library or on the podcast app. I hope it's beneficial to you. I will be talking to you this Thursday, July 25th at 7 p.m. Mountain Time about the drama of the gifted child. And this will conclude our review of old podcasts and webinars that we're trying to improve some of the audio quality on. So we'll get into some new topics after that. I'm interested in topic suggestions or book suggestions that any of you might have. All right, folks, thank you for coming tonight. Take care. Have a great week, and I'll talk to you in a couple of days. Bye-bye.